Hey everyone, I want to walk you through a preview of the heredity lesson for students. This is the digital version of the heredity lesson on dominant and recessive Mendelian genetics. So taking a look at the drive that you'll have access to first, we have a teacher page here. This is a PDF just giving some possible responses to questions, kind of like an answer guide, and then also a little background information on DNA and genetics. But I want to focus in here on the actual student work, the student notebook that students will be doing. So we'll take a look at that now. So again, we start with our title page and then a table of contents. I did set up the table of contents just slightly differently this time. I have these tabs on the side, and each of these tabs are linked to take you to the slide where that specific assignment begins. I did this for a couple of reasons. First of all, this is a pretty lengthy lesson. It's got about 45 slides in it. And so for some students, that's going to be very overwhelming. So one thing that you can consider doing is once you have your copy of this lesson, you can actually split it up by assignment and just assign out each individual pieces to the students. So for example, just take slides 3 through 5 and assign that first, and then 6 through 15 and assign that next. So you can definitely do that. You can also have students use these tabs. So when you're only working on that assignment, go ahead and use that tab to click to that assignment like that. So think of it as sort of like a digital notebook where students, or a workbook where students are flipping to the various assignments that they're going to work on. So it's just another little piece where you can figure out what's going to work best for your students and then adapt it to their needs. So starting off, just a review passage talking about DNA and a little recap on the fact that there are sets of chromosomes or 2 alleles for every trait. So getting into a little bit of that. And then the first activity that students are going to work on is kind of a becoming Mendel activity. So really starting to get students to think like scientists and think like Mendel did, and look at some of the observations that he made and seeing what conclusions they can come to like Mendel did. So really kind of putting themselves into his shoes and thinking the way he did when he came up with these first observations and first ideas about genetics. Really quick, just a little formatting piece here. So there is a tab on each of the slides, and that'll always take the students back to the table of contents. So I just wanted to point that out really quick. So back to the Mendel observation activity. So this is before students get any knowledge about genetics. They're going to take a look at 2 very common observations that Mendel did. So looking at his pea plant flower color trait, so purple flowers and white flowers, and what observations he made. And then they're going to kind of record their own thoughts and observations here, much like Mendel did. And then the same thing with the actual pea form. So was it a smooth pea or a wrinkle pea? And again, they're just really thinking like scientists here and making observations, thinking about, well, why could that be? Why might that have happened? Then they're going to put all of this together. So they're going to think about, okay, so what was showing up most often? What can we conclude about that? What was showing up least often? And then pairing that with their knowledge of chromosomes and alleles, which is more advanced than what Mendel had access to, but pairing it with that knowledge, they're going to think about, so what does this tell us about those alleles? What does this tell us about the traits and how our bodies and our chromosomes and our cells determine which traits are going to show up as the phenotypes? So they're going to work through those problems there. Then after they've kind of had this anticipatory introduction to observation activity, then they're going to really get into the heart of it. So then they're going to look at the rules of inheritance, focusing on, in this lesson, they're really focusing on that first basic genetic rule of dominant and recessive traits. So the dominant allele will always take over and become the phenotype over the recessive allele. So they've got a reading passage here that really should take what they've observed in the Mendelian activity and kind of put it together in a more scientific terms and way of thinking. So they'll go through that reading activity there. They've got a nice little glossary for those trickier vocabulary words. And then they're going to start putting it into practice. So they're going to start with some really basic practice of genotype and phenotype. If I have this genotype, what shows up as the phenotype? And then vice versa. If I have this phenotype, what possible genotypes could I have? So thinking of those things. Next, we're going to get into predicting traits. So this is really where the heart of it is, right? So this is where we get into those Punnett squares and the idea of probability and really thinking about, well, so if I wanted to predict the possible outcomes, how does that work? So this is really going to take them through the idea of a Punnett square, looking at how that Punnett square works, how we use it to predict the possible outcomes of two mating pairs, two crosses. And then at the very end, kind of relating it back to meiosis. So at this point, they've hopefully talked about meiosis. And one of the things that we really want them to see with this activity is that relationship between meiosis and the Punnett square and how those pieces fit together. Then they're going to do some practice on their own. This is set up so that they can insert, these are text boxes here, so they can insert the letters in, making sure to use capitals and lower cases as needed, and then get the results and answer these final questions. The last piece here, this is sort of slides 42 through 45, is you can think of it like an assessment piece for this lesson. So again, kind of a nice piece to pull out and assign separately, and you can make that your assessment for this lesson. So in this, they're going to put it all together using this fictional monster species called wobbles. So they're going to think of phenotype and genotype for the trait of eye number or number of eyes. They're going to figure out some possible crosses, make some predictions about possible offspring. And then they're going to use that information to try and determine if these were the actual offspring. They're going to work backwards and try and use that information to figure out for sure what the genotypes of the parents are. So this is a really nice culminating activity that that really goes through practicing all the different pieces of using that dominant recessive genetic idea. So that's the lesson. Let me know what you think of it. You can leave comments or feedback. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching.